Chapter 2: The Man Who Walked and Watched. Aristotle's life is easy to flatten into a sequence of famous connections: student of Plato, tutor of Alexander, founder of the Lyceum. The names are so large that they can swallow the man. But if we slow down, a more interesting figure appears. He is not merely a bridge between two greater celebrities. He is a boy from a northern town who became a tireless observer, a young foreigner in Athens who spent 20 years in Plato's academy and still learned how to disagree, a teacher who built a school around walking, talking, collecting, and comparing, a writer whose surviving works often feel less like polished books than the dense working notes of a mind that never stopped sorting the world. He was born in 384 BCE in Stagira, on the Chalcidic coast. The place had the texture of a borderland, Greek but not Athenian, close to Macedon but open to the sea. Later Athenians could be proud and suspicious about outsiders, and Aristotle would never be simply one of them. That distance may have mattered. To live slightly off-center is to see that every city mistakes some of its habits for nature. The outsider notices what insiders breathe without noticing. His father, Nicomachus, was associated with the Macedonian court as a physician, and this fact has always tempted readers to imagine the young Aristotle growing up among instruments, remedies, animal bodies, and careful talk about health. We should not pretend to know the scenes too vividly. Ancient biography is often a thin cloth patched by later hands. Still, the connection to medicine fits the man he became. Physicians had to be practical natural philosophers. They observed the body not as an ornament, but as a system whose order could falter. They asked about causes before that word became one of Aristotle's great tools. Why fever now? Why pain here? Why does one regimen help and another harm? In Aristotle, that medical cast of mind widened until it included almost everything. He would ask what makes a fish, what makes a law stable, what makes a friendship noble, what makes a tragedy work on the emotions, what makes an argument valid, what makes a human life flourish. The child of Stagira became the adult who refused to leave any major region of experience unexamined. Around the age of 17, he traveled to Athens and entered Plato's academy. Imagine the journey not as a young man stepping into a museum of greatness, but into a living school. Plato was still alive. The memory of Socrates still shaped the atmosphere. Mathematics mattered there, because it trained the mind away from the blur of opinion toward necessity and form. Dialectic mattered because a claim had to survive questioning. The academy was not a modern university, but it was an institution devoted to the idea that thinking can be cultivated, disciplined, and shared. Aristotle stayed for roughly 20 years. That length of time deserves respect. He did not glance at Plato and hurry away to found his own brand. He absorbed the academy's seriousness from youth into maturity. He learned the power of definition, the demand for argument, and the grandeur of asking what justice, beauty, being, and goodness are. Plato gave him more than doctrines. He gave him a model of philosophy as a way of life. Yet the best students are not copies. Aristotle's disagreement with Plato was not the rebellion of a shallow mind eager to be original. It was the friction produced by loyalty to the same love of truth. Plato's thought reached beyond the visible world toward eternal forms. Aristotle increasingly asked whether the form of a thing must be placed elsewhere in order to explain it. If we want to understand a horse, should we look away from horses toward a separate horse itself, or should we study living horses, their bodies, movement, reproduction, purposes, and powers? If we want to understand justice, should we begin with an ideal beyond cities, or with actual communities and the way laws shape character? The difference was not that Plato loved reason and Aristotle loved facts. Aristotle loved reason intensely. But he thought reason had to begin with, return to, and be tested against the world of particular things. He had a collector's patience, a classifier's instinct, and a teacher's need for examples. He could follow an abstract distinction, but he wanted to know what it illuminated. When Plato died in 347 BCE, Aristotle left Athens. The reasons were likely mixed: intellectual succession at the academy, political tensions, and his own connections outside the city. He spent time in Asia Minor, especially around Assos, under the patronage of Hermias of Atanius. There he married Pythias, a woman traditionally described as Hermias's relative or adopted daughter. These years are easy to hurry past, but they may have been among the most fertile of his life. Away from Athens, near the eastern Aegean, Aristotle had access to coastlines, islands, animals, and local knowledge. On Lesbos, especially around Mytilene, later tradition places him in an environment rich for biological observation. It is pleasant and not unreasonable to imagine him watching the life of lagoons and shorelines, cuttlefish, fish, shellfish, birds, the small dramas of reproduction and movement. Some of his biological writings preserve observations so specific that they seem to come from a man, or a circle of investigators, who took the living world seriously at close range. He was often wrong by modern standards, but he was not merely guessing from an armchair. He wanted eyes involved in thought. Then came the Macedonian chapter. Philip II, king of Macedon, invited Aristotle to tutor his son Alexander. The story is famous because the boy became Alexander the Great, and fame casts backward light. We want to know whether Aristotle made Alexander what he was. The honest answer is, only partly, if at all, and in ways we cannot measure. A tutor can shape vocabulary, taste, ambition, and moral imagination, but he cannot control a conqueror's soul. Still, the scene is irresistible. Aristotle, the disciplined philosopher, faces a brilliant young prince whose future will be made of speed, risk, command, and appetite. What does one teach such a student? Poetry, no doubt. Homer was precious to Alexander. Ethics, perhaps, though history gives little comfort that the lessons always held. Politics, rhetoric, natural knowledge, Greek culture, the superiority the Greeks often claimed over others, some of it noble, some of it troubling. Aristotle's own writings include views about non-Greeks, slavery, and hierarchy that modern readers must criticize plainly. The Macedonian court did not rescue him from the prejudices of his age. In some ways, it reinforced them. Yet tutoring Alexander also placed Aristotle near power without making him simply powerful. He saw, or had reason to see, that ideas do not live only in schools. They enter armies, courts, colonizing projects, laws, and the education of rulers. He would later write about constitutions with the sobriety of a man who knew politics was not a children's game of ideals. Power has causes. Regimes have characters. Ambition must be understood if it is to be judged. After Alexander began his campaigns and the Greek world shifted beneath Macedonian dominance, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school, the Lyceum. The name came from a sanctuary and gymnasium associated with Apollo Lysias, but the institution became associated with Aristotle's style of teaching. His followers were later called peripatetics, often linked with walking. Whether every lecture happened on foot is less important than the image. Philosophy in motion, conversation paced by steps, inquiry unfolding among buildings, trees, scrolls, and specimens. The Lyceum seems to have been a busy intellectual workshop. It was not only a place for lofty pronouncements. Aristotle and his students collected constitutions. They studied animals. They examined rhetoric, poetry, logic, ethics, politics, physics, metaphysics, memory, sleep, generation, corruption, the soul, and the heavens. If Plato's academy can sometimes feel like a school, organized around ascent toward the eternal, Aristotle's Lyceum feels like a school, with doors open to the whole furnished world. This does not mean Aristotle was a modern scientist born too early. He did not conduct experiments in our sense, and many of his explanations depend on assumptions later science would reject. But he helped dignify the patient study of nature. He insisted that knowledge begins in perception and experience, then rises through memory, comparison, and reasoning toward causes. A person who wants understanding must not despise ordinary things. The egg, the hoof, the beak, the habit, the household, the courtroom speech, each can become evidence. His surviving writings reveal both the size of the project and the strangeness of its transmission. Many works we have are probably not polished literary books prepared for a broad public. They often read like lecture materials, compressed treatises, or notes shaped by later editors. Some of his more elegant dialogues, praised in antiquity, are lost. This should make us cautious. The Aristotle we read is both immense and incomplete. We are listening in part through walls. Even so, his personality comes through in method. He begins by gathering opinions, especially reputable ones. He distinguishes senses of a word. He asks what problem has produced confusion. He sorts. He defines. He tests. He moves from common speech toward technical precision, but usually without contempt for common speech. He believes ordinary language often preserves real insight, though it needs refinement. His private life is known only in fragments. He married Pythias, and after her death was connected with Hercules of Stagira, with whom he had a son named Nicomachus. The name echoes his father and later clings to the Nicomachean Ethics, though the exact editorial history of that work is uncertain. In his will, Aristotle shows concern for household members, family obligations, and proper care for those attached to him. Such documents remind us that the philosopher of substance and syllogism also lived among griefs, loyalties, inheritances, and practical arrangements. That matters because Aristotle's ethics is not the dream of a man floating above life. He writes about friendship with unusual warmth. He understands that happiness is not a mood, but an activity stretched across a complete life, vulnerable to fortune but not reducible to it. He knows that character is formed by repeated action, as a path is formed by walking. He knows that the young are not made virtuous by hearing beautiful speeches alone. They must be trained to take pleasure and pain in the right things. Behind the theory one senses a teacher who has watched people become themselves, for better and worse, through habit. The Lyceum years were his great period of organized work. Here Aristotle became not only a philosopher, but a builder of intellectual community. He did not want insights to vanish with the speaker. He wanted methods that could be handed on, how to classify arguments, how to compare constitutions, how to describe animals, how to distinguish causes, how to ask what a thing is for. The school gathered knowledge like a harbor gathers ships from different coasts. But Athens remained politically dangerous. Aristotle was linked to Macedon by birth, family history, and his role with Alexander. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, anti-Macedonian feeling rose in Athens. Aristotle was accused of impiety, the same broad charge that had helped destroy Socrates. Later tradition says he left the city so that Athens would not sin twice against philosophy. The line may be too neat to trust fully, but it captures the mood. He understood the danger and withdrew. He went to Chalcis on the island of Euboea, where he died in 322 BCE. He was 62. It is a quiet ending for a life so intellectually expansive. No final conquest, no dramatic martyrdom, no serene old age surrounded by universal gratitude. A philosopher leaves the city, crosses water, settles elsewhere and dies. The works remain behind, though not all of them. The school continues, though changed. The questions keep moving. What sort of person emerges from this life? Not a saint. Not a modern liberal before his time. Not a flawless empiricist or a pure rationalist. Aristotle was a man of his century, marked by its exclusions and confident hierarchies. His acceptance of slavery and his views about women are not minor blemishes to be waved away. They show how a great mind can still mistake social arrangements for natural truths. That warning is part of his legacy too. But neither should criticism blind us to the genuine breadth and discipline of his vocation. Aristotle tried to make thought answerable to reality. He wanted to know what things are, not only what clever people can say about them. He believed education shapes desire. He believed a community has moral responsibilities. He believed arguments have forms that can be tested. He believed animals, plants, and ordinary human practices deserve patient attention. He believed the good life is built, not wished into being. Perhaps the most human image of him is not the bust with blank eyes, but the walker. Aristotle walking with students at the Lyceum, Aristotle walking a shoreline and noticing forms of life, Aristotle walking away from Plato while carrying Plato's seriousness with him, Aristotle walking out of Athens when politics turned against him. The movement is not restless in the shallow sense. It is the motion of a mind that understands inquiry as a path. You do not possess wisdom all at once. You approach, revise, compare, return. His biography teaches that philosophy is not born only in solitude. It grows from places, teachers, patrons, rivalries, marriages, schools, dangers, and the stubborn facts of the world. Stagira gave Aristotle distance. The Academy gave him discipline. Assos and Lesbos gave him living variety. Macedon gave him proximity to power. The Lyceum gave him a community and a method. Exile gave his life its final reminder that reason always lives in history, never above it. To meet Aristotle as a person is to meet a thinker who made attention into a way of life. He watched the world with the expectation that it could be understood. He walked among students with the confidence that understanding could be taught. And he left behind not a finished palace of certainty, but something more durable and more useful, a set of paths through the questions that living beings, speaking animals, and political communities cannot avoid.